Okay, this is my talk on Cubesats getting us to Mars. This is our brave astronaut. They have donned a spacesuit. They have...
I'll tell you how that works for a buck.
Okay. This is our brave astronaut who has strapped 2 Cubesats, 1 to each foot, and as a result, they will be able to get to Mars. Yes? Nobody's agreeing with this proposition. Okay. Typically, Cubesats don't have enough propulsion to blow your nose, much less get you to Mars. So there's got to be a way around that. One of the things that we're working on and testing in the lab is using a solenoid as a magnetic sail. This magnetic sail idea was one of those brilliant ideas of Dr. Zubrin. Okay, I know where the feedback is coming from. We're testing this example magnetic sail in the lab at UNM. Basically, we have a glass tube. We have a plasma torch that provides some plasma to go by, and that is then magnetically attached to our carrier. And there's a specific equation, VBL, which says for a given velocity of plasma moving by, for a given bias field of magnets, and a given length, you get a specific amount of force. It's a derived form of Faraday's law. And we are getting results that we believe it will be very easy to provide 1G and 2G accelerations all the way to Mars. That comes from this motional EMF, which is the law. Now, we know in the Star Trek universe that torpedoes, particularly the Mark IV photon torpedoes, of sufficient size that you can put a person in it. And for Vulcans, this is the favorite method of point-to-point travel, because apparently no one else will keep from going psychotic over those long distances traveling by torpedo. So while it is possible, it's probably not a very good method of getting there. Locally, we have power sources. In the upper left quadrant, you can see the magnetosphere. The magnetosphere has some interesting components. You have the Peterson currents and the Hall currents of our magnetosphere, but the important ones here are the Birkeland currents. They're the ones that are your elevator to space. They can take you from low Earth orbit all the way out to GEO and beyond. That puts you in the sphere of the top right quadrant, the interplanetary magnetic field. Now, we don't normally think our planet as being part of a series of interplanetary magnetic fields, but that's because we don't see with eyes that see magnets. We don't see magnetic fields directly. Otherwise, we would realize that we're part of a big web. Well, that big web goes on out to the heliosphere, which covers all the planets, and then out to the interstellar magnetic field, which goes on to Alpha and Proxima Centauri. We've tested the ability to take power out of the magnetosphere as far back as Gemini 11, 1966. It's ruled by this same VBL equation. If you have an open loop, you get power. If you have a closed loop, you get propulsion. That is also the same thing that you get from Dr. Zubrin's magnetic sail, which was the source of his work from early 90s. I think I have the actual date in here somewhere. But this is a very big type of magnetic sail. It has to be because it's based on plasma density. Our magnetic sail, the compact magnetic sail, is not based on plasma density. It's based on the magnetic fields. There are a variety of these things that have been proposed over the years. The nice thing about it, the upper left diagram, is that it builds a shell, a magnetic shell around the spacecraft. Well, that's really nice because that means none of the charged particles.
Go ahead, I just kind of turned it down.
Okay. None of the charged particles from the outside can get into your spacecraft. They have to flow around the magnetic field of your spacecraft. So the only radiation you have to deal with are neutrals. Neutrals can be dealt with by an ice wall, for instance. It's kind of nice to have ice with you on the trip. You know, you can put it in drinks and stuff. The top right is a different form called the magnetoplasma sail. It's from a genius in Japan, Dr. Funaki. And then we have, I'm going to really butcher this name, and I'm sorry, but Jorma Kankunen's electric sail, and John Slow's plasma magnet sail from University of Washington. All of these are big, big, clunky objects, very hard to deploy. In fact, in the 3 times that they've tried to deploy the electric sail, the deployment has failed every single time. Now, that's not to say it will fail on the 4th time or the 5th time or the 6th time. It just says there's a lot of difficulties in deploying those sails at this point in time. In our case, we're looking at something a lot simpler. We are looking at a simple rocket where we have a second stage. The first stage can be liquid, solid, whatever. The second stage is one of these coils that if you get it up to the 85-mile or above beginning of the ionosphere, what is going on here with the feedback? Okay. Well, thank you. You have a timer on the coil that then shorts out the coil when you have lost the need of your propulsion. So you can take that once you get to the 85-mile limit, and you can drive on up to low Earth orbit or higher up to geosynchronous orbit, or on out either the north or the south path and out into the universe. As mentioned before, if you have an open solenoid, you get current flow. So that leads to another concept called driver charger. In driver charger, you have one coil that drives you and one coil that powers you. So you can extract very substantial amounts of power from the magnetosphere and from the heliosphere. This, however, is a different creature altogether. This is what we call shark fin. And it is a craft that has a full 3D extent of different magnetic coils that can be turned on and off. And they can be used to do retro propulsion so that you can use it not only to accelerate and go somewhere, but to slow down somewhere. Kind of an important capability. You might want to try driving your car without brakes. No, you wouldn't. And you wouldn't want to run your spacecraft without brakes either. That gives you a time to Mars on a continuous 1g acceleration Closest approach, 2 days. Full opposite side of the sun, 7 days. Because you're doing continuous thrust to accelerate and continuous thrust to decelerate. So that accumulation over time tends to be rather important, even if you're only just doing 10 meters every second. Now, not everything has to be human rated. When you're talking about a robot, you can take your little Cubesat and you can kick it up to 7 Gs, and then you can be to the other side in a day. So there's a lot of potential there to get around the universe, but not for humans. The universe is not for you. Mars is not for you. Okay, it's only for the Cubesats. That brings up the idea of why would we do it? Well, how could we die? We could die by an asteroid coming and smashing our planet apart. We could die in a coronal mass ejection where the sun has a belch and it hits us square in the face. We could die by nuclear war, which seems more likely by the day, if you've been paying attention to the news. And we could die by methane hydrate bubbles, which are now popping in the Arctic at record rates, driving the rapid heating of the Arctic areas and leading to the most recent model from Los Alamos National Labs, predicting that in 2050, the summertime temperatures in central New Mexico will hit 145 degrees. If you go outside into that without a spacesuit, you'll be dead in 15 minutes. So, what do we do about that? How do we defend our planet? Well, first of all, if you're going to stop the incoming object, it's a lot easier to just knock it out of the way than it is to go do the Bruce Willis thing and blow it up. But there's a bigger problem. How do you know that it's even coming? We've had several asteroids that have gone right by Earth that NASA didn't even know were there. There was a famous one that blew up in Russia. Nobody even saw it coming. Why? Because it was coming from the wrong direction. It came by the sun. And so nobody even had a clue that it was going to hit us until it did. Finally, how do we get it all done? Well, the competitors have to realize that saving the planet is just as important as saving their own skin. Profit has got to be less important than saving everybody. Distance matters. If you're trying to do something that's close to Earth, not hard to get there. You're trying to do something up by Pluto, still takes a long time to get there. The relative amount of how quickly you can get to some place is always going to be determined by distance. Distance is also the amount of energy that it takes to change whatever is out there from coming and smashing you. If you're at a very small distance, like where that pale blue dot is, you have to have an awful lot of energy to get a deflection enough to get it around the planet. If on the other hand, you're out, that's Uranus on the right there. If you're out past the orbit of Neptune, above Uranus, or you're at Uranus, it takes a very small amount of energy to deflect it so that it doesn't hit us. So distance and time, two important considerations. That means that you have to stop thinking in the old terms. If you're going to think like Kahn, you're going to lose, because you're going to have a 2D view of the universe, and Kirk is going to beat you like a drum every time. Because in the 3D view of the universe, you don't have a Lagrange point in your orbit, you have a Lagrange ellipse. It's the 3D solution to the two-body problem. And so that means that you have an entire ring around your planet, whichever planet or planetary object that it is, that you can park stuff at. That's what we call the solar system parking lot. And this is its diagram. You can start near the sun. In theory, you could maybe park things directly above the sun and directly below the sun, but due to the charges flowing out of the sun, that's not really such a good idea. So we start with Mercury's orbit being where the solar system, north and south. Now, you realize that north and south here, because we're looking at it sideways and the ellipse kind of goes through the page. So you have Venus north and south, Earth north and south, Mars north and south, Ceres north and south, Jupiter north and south, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Eris. If you put observatories at these places, someday staffed with people, if they're ever allowed to go to space again, you now have the capability in this parking lot to park stuff there and see what's coming at you. That means you can also put communications capabilities there. You can do things like the solar system positioning system. Know where you are. Have a GPS for everywhere in the universe or in the solar system that you're going to be. Likewise, you can have a universal network in those same locations so that no matter where you are, you'll actually be able to communicate, unlike those of you who use teeters. Is there anybody here that uses teeters? Okay. TDRS, the system that we use to communicate with Mars most of the time. Very slow, very old, not multipath, not particularly able to handle higher data rates and volumes that settling the solar system are going to provide. So these types of locations can be used to provide those essential infrastructure capabilities to the rest of the solar system. That means that when you actually start building Buzz Aldrin's cycler system, where you build a base on the moon, then you build a space station in geosynchronous orbit above Houston, so it's named Johnson Prime. Very important not to get those words backwards. You build a base on Mars, you build Ares Prime at aerosynchronous orbit above Mars, and you can start sending ships in between the stations. Because those ships will be able to travel much faster using magnetic sails. They can have their own gravity. So you can either have the 1g acceleration that provides your gravity, or you can coast and use a conventional centrifugal force generation for your gravity. Either way, you're going to have fleets of ships that don't spend their time going in and out of gravity wells. This is a design principle called factoring. If it doesn't need to go in and out of the gravity well, don't make it do it. Have craft that are devoted to that gravity well that bring things up. You have a place to gather and then ship things off to their destination. This is really just the airport and hotel complexes that we built on Earth, scooped up and put into space. Buzz Aldrin's work, not mine. If you look at the ancient Russian scientist Tsiolkovsky, he told us about the tax we would have to pay. The fatter your rocket, the more you spend in fuel for that rocket to get it out of the gravity well. If your rocket is small, let's say you're only shooting 5 or 6 people into space at a time, you don't need to have the huge fuel budget that you would for something to send 100 people at a time. Starship's a wonderful thing for shipping big amounts of cargo to space. It's not such a great idea for shipping big numbers of people because it uses much more fuel. The mass ratio goes up. The fatter your rocket, like SLS or above, the more you're wasting fuel to get there. That's why we're working on a smaller rocket. And again, because space is not meant for humans, it's only meant for Cubesats. Those of you who know me know that that's a sarcastic thing. I very much want to go space. Anyhow, this is based on the original design of the Black Grant 3. That's a Canadian rocket. As a result, we can't really use it. We're not going to be civilized when we go to space. We're going to be barbarians. So we have to make our own design that is a ripoff of the Black Grant design. Instead of 17-inch diameter, it's 13-inch diameter. It's still 26 feet long. It has the second stage, which has the springboard and a orbital insertion motor if you're just going to use it to deliver CubeSats and then test the sail afterwards. But it can launch 10 CubeSats, 10 3U CubeSats at a time into low Earth orbit, 200 to 400 kilometer orbits. That means you also have, since you have 5 at this end and 5 at that end, you also have the potential to launch 3 of the 6U CubeSats on each end, or 6 of those, or 2 of the 12U CubeSats, or 2 of the 27U CubeSats per launch. The nice thing is each individual launch will cost you no more than $300,000, and it will presumably drop over time fairly quickly to the range of about $120,000. So it will shortly be only $12,000 to get a CubeSat pretty much anywhere in the solar system. Because remember, once you get to low Earth orbit, the Magsail takes over and you go the rest of the distance you want for free, thanks to solar power through the magnetosphere and heliosphere. So, compact magnetic sails can exploit the magnetospheres of planets, Jupiter being a big one. That can throw you around a lot of places, and other planets, and the heliosphere, which can take you basically anywhere in the solar system. Human-rated spacecraft will be delayed 10 years or more because this design provides radiation protection, and we can't have that. That's a threat to government control of space, because if people know that they can go to space without any radiation risk, well, they'll probably want to go. If people want to go, but CubeSats have already gone there, then why go? I mean, it's not like you're going to be the first Mark Watney, the first person to do whatever it was there. There will be a CubeSat that's already done it. Those of you who know me know that I'm being sarcastic. Bases are more important than stations because bases have resources. And that's the whole essence of the gateway argument. There's no reason to build a gateway to go near the moon. The only reason to go to the moon is go to the moon and have a base that scoops up the dirt and cooks the dirt and gets the oxygen out and gets the metals and takes the metals into a 3D printer, which prints them into new spacecraft. Or, if you've seen my other presentations, lawn chairs. the most important thing to print on the surface of Mars, lawn chairs. So that you can go out there with your beer and look at the Martian sunset and sit in your lawn chair. If you print the lawn chairs, they will come. Coco Chantal and SpringBoard provide a short term. We're working on it this fall. We're hoping to have our first launch in December. And we know at the very start that we can do it for less than $30,000 per 3U CubeSat. We believe that we can reduce the price dramatically after that. Some of that depends on whether the FAA continues on with their practice of reducing commercial launch prices for CubeSats. But since that's governmental, that's beyond my control. And for the crowdfunding that we're doing to actually do the launch, you can go to the bit.ly to be able to get more information on the project. And our partners, Lobo Launch and UNM, who they're the rocketeers who are doing the rocket engineering and manufacturing to make this all work. All right, so I'm just a couple minutes shy of my being out of time. Be happy to take questions.
Yes, using an exchange orbiter magnetically, what is the profile of the 1G acceleration? If I had a crew on board there, when is it at 1G and when does it drop off?
Okay. When you get to the magnetosphere above 85 miles, that's when you get your 1G.
Yeah, that's when you stop. Yeah.
So then you slide on out up either the northern cusp or the southern magnetic cusp, depending on whether you launch from North America or Australia. And then you receive the heliosphere's magnetic field, and you have a solar wind that's between 150 and 850 kilometers a second. That velocity passing you by, you only borrow 10 meters a second of that, and you continue your acceleration on out into space. Now, at some point, you're going to realize that you're heading towards the sun. And that's probably not where you wanted to go, but you picked up a lot of speed. So you're going to need to reorient your spacecraft, okay? And then you will continue accelerating away from the sun until you get to roughly the mid-course of where you're going. Then you'll shut down your coils, realign them, okay? And make sure that you've got your outrigger coils there to keep the twisting moment from you being north against north or south against south, from flipping your poles back to north-south orientation. And you will then have the heliosphere doing retropropulsion for you as you slow down on your way to Mars. When you get to Mars orbit, you will still have power. You will still be able to get things from the driver charger secondary coil to be able to power your spacecraft, but you'll probably shut off your propulsive coils to go into orbit, since you'll have slowed down enough to be at the correct speed.
And that's when you want to, that's when you go below 1G.
Well, when you shut your coils off, you're gonna go back to 0G.
Yeah, right.
So it's going to be a rather abrupt transition if you're not ready for it. If you haven't bolted down all the urinals and toilets and stuff, it's going to get messy. You know, but you'll have to have taken care of all the wet works before you turn the power off.
Well, wouldn't there be some problem? Don't the north and south magnetic fields have large amounts of particle energy in them that would cause trouble?
That's true if you stay on that direct magnetic pole. But what you're doing is you're taking one of the flows either back towards the sun or one of the flows that goes out from the Earth outward. So there's a 25 to 27 day rotating It's the sprinkler of the solar system, if you want to think of it that way. But there's a 25 to 27 day period where the solar wind is pointed in a particular direction and it just continues around and around. So it's stronger. That's where the 800 kilometer a second time is when it's directly pointed at you. But it's still 150 kilometers a second when it's pointed the other way. So there's always a solar wind pressure against the magnetosphere of the Earth, and that always leads to a way back to the sun to reconnect and a way outward to connect with the interstellar magnetic field. Anybody else? Okay, thank you very much for your time.